Welcome, everyone. Thank you for attending our town hall entitled Rock of Ages, a town hall on the Wakasa Public Letter. Tonight, we will be discussing the Wakasa Memorial Stone as well as the sacred site. We will also be giving an overview of the public letter that was open from September 22nd until October 31st of this year, which was available for people to sign in support of preserving our history. First, we would like to dedicate this program to the nearly 2,000 ancestors, including Mr. Wakasa, all of whom our community lost during the years of confinement. We also would like to honor the memory of 5 advisors and members of the Wakasa Memorial Committee who have passed away since 2021 when the committee was founded, including historians Roger Daniels and Art Hansen, preservationist Mary Urshima, Topaz survivor Akemi Ina, as well as Topaz descendant Martha Nakagawa. I would also like to include the memory of my great-grandfather Hitsuji Araki, who passed away in Topaz 6 days after Mr. Wakasa was murdered. If you'll all please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you so much for joining me. Now, I would like to introduce our guests for this evening. Patrick Hayashi. Patrick was born at Topaz. He spent much of his career working on social justice issues. He was one of the first directors of Asian American Studies at UC Berkeley. In 1988, when he was appointed vice chancellor, he became the highest ranking Asian American in the UC system. Patrick is also an amazing artist. His work can be found at patrickhayashi.com. He is shown here as he helps us make a papier-mâché lantern that is a paper replica of the Wakasa Monument. It was taken to Topaz for a remembrance ceremony at the place where Mr. Wakasa died. Miguel Gutierrez. Miguel is a professional archaeologist and principal investigator at a Houston, Texas cultural heritage management firm. His field experience includes site work in 10 different U.S. states, as well as Peru and Turkey. Miguel visited the Wakasa Historic Site at Topaz with the committee last year. He viewed the Wakasa Monument at the Topaz Museum in Delta as part of the Wakasa Memorial Committee pilgrimage to Topaz. And me, my name is Lauren Araki. I am a Topaz descendant. 3 generations of my family were forcibly incarcerated in Topaz from Oakland, California. I also am a board member for the Mile High JACL chapter in Denver, Colorado. My advocacy work has always been inspired by my family, in particular, my Uncle George and my Aunt Nancy, who continue to inspire me to this day. One of my interests include education about the camps so that this does not happen again, although sadly, we are currently experiencing a repetition of our history. Sorry. And now, Patrick would like to make some opening remarks. Patrick, the floor is yours.
For me, this is personal. My parents, like most Nisei, didn't talk much about the camps. But when I was 7, my mother told me the story of Mr. Wakasa. She said that Mr. Wakasa was an old deaf man, and every afternoon he would take a walk around the edge of Topaz. One day he saw a beautiful flower on the other side of the fence, and he reached through the fence to try to get it. The guard in the watchtower ordered him to back away from the fence, but he couldn't hear him. Mr. Wakasa couldn't hear him, so the guard shot and killed him. At the time, I didn't understand why my mother was telling me this awful story. She had always taught me to try to get along with everyone. But with this story, she seemed to be telling me something else. She seemed to be telling me to be wary, to not trust people, especially white people. This confused me. So I put the story out of my mind as something that happened a very long time ago. Now, 75 years later, I am just beginning to understand why she told me Mr. Wakasa's story. My mother at the time was not well. She had a rheumatic heart, and I think she sensed that she didn't have long to live. By telling me Mr. Wakasa's story, I think she was trying to prepare me for life after she was gone, to prepare me for a world in which I would face racism, hatred, and violence, just as she had. But she was not just warning me to be vigilant. She wanted me to do more than think of Mr. Wakasa's murder. She wanted me to think about the man himself, to ask, who was Hatsuaki Wakasa? We know that he studied at Keio University, one of the most prestigious and progressive universities in Japan. And maybe that's why he had a picture of Abraham Lincoln in his room in Topaz. We don't know why he came to California. We don't know what his dreams were. We don't know who he loved or who he was. And we don't know much about the landscape gardeners who built a 2,000-pound monument to bear witness to Mr. Wakasa's life and his death. Camp authorities ordered them to destroy the monument. But rather than destroy the monument, the Issei landscapers decide to bury it so that decades later, we could find it. And what do we know about the 2,000 people who attended Mr. Wakasa's funeral? How did the women feel as they folded hundreds of paper flowers to honor his memory? And what did they feel as they draped their flowers over his coffin? And why did the army set up machine guns at the funeral? And why did the Issei and Nisei men come armed with rocks, with 2x4s, and steel pipes? What was in their hearts? How would they contain their grief and their rage? What would they do? They all knew that 6 months earlier, at Manzanar, soldiers shot and killed protesters. Now, we've all been part of large, angry mobs. We've all seen how things can turn deadly in a heartbeat, just as they did at Manzanar. But something different happened in Topaz at Mr. Wakasa's funeral. 2,000 people began singing Rock of Ages. Some sang in Japanese, some in English. Rock of Ages, left for me, Chitose no Iwayo, let me hide myself in thee. This is a Christian hymn, but its message transcended Christianity. Whenever people sing together, something always miraculous happens. In all protest movements, people always sing together. Because when we sing together, our hearts start to beat together. And this is what happened at Mr. Wakasa's funeral. People's hearts started to beat together, and their anger and grief turned into feelings of community strength and community solidarity. These are the feelings we must now try to emulate. As we all know, there have been sharp disagreements between the Topaz Museum and the Wakasa Memorial Committee about how to treat Mr. Wakasa's monument. I would like to suggest something in the spirit of reconciliation. For the moment, I suggest that we try to put our disagreements aside and focus on larger issues. In the overall scheme of things, we have much more in common with each other than we have issues that divide us. Our own government has launched an unprecedented attack on our history. We all share a moral responsibility to tell our story fully and honestly. I hope that tonight we can discuss ways we can work together, not just for ourselves, but on behalf of all people who are being physically attacked and socially persecuted. Immigrants, gays, trans people, people of color, and all people who are fighting to make America a multicultural, multiracial democracy, a democracy committed to equity and inclusion. Let's find ways to join forces to combat this administration's efforts to whitewash our history. Let's think about what Martin Luther King said. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. When he said that, he wasn't stating a fact. Rather, he was expressing his hope for what America might become. When white police officers on horseback beat, kicked, and spat on him, he chose not to hate them. Instead, he chose to see their God-given goodness. I believe that we now face a similar choice. Our own government is now doing terrible things to innocent, defenseless people. None of this surprises any of us because this is what our government said that it would do. But what surprises us, all of us, has been our government's naked cruelty. We've all seen it. Rather than arrest a man and lead him quietly away, ICE agents will throw the man on the ground, put their knees on his neck, twist his arms backwards, handcuff him as tightly, painfully, and brutally as possible. We've all seen it, but what can we do? I'm not sure. But the first thing we must do is to reject the temptation to respond in kind. James Baldwin said that when faced with inhumane cruelty, we must hold in our mind forever two absolutely contradictory ideas. First, we have to accept life as it is and people as they are. This means we must accept violence and racism as commonplace. But Baldwin said that the second idea is of equal power. We must never accept such injustice and inhumanity as commonplace. Rather, we must fight against injustice and inhumanity with all our might. And this fight, he said, must begin in our hearts. We must fight to keep our hearts free of hatred and despair. And that is what we are all doing tonight. The first thing we must do is insist that our individual stories and the story of our community be told fully and honestly. We can begin by drawing inspiration and strength from Mr. Wakasa's monument. When the Issei landscapers created their beautiful monument, when their hands touched it, they touched it with love. The love that went into the making of Mr. Wakasa's monument created within it the power to evoke powerful feelings in each of us. It has the power to evoke deeply personal memories. Whenever we think about Mr. Wakasa's monument, we always think about our parents who sacrificed their lives to make our lives better. Whenever I think about Mr. Wakasa, I think about my mother. During the summer, my mom would work the swing shift at Hunt's Cannery, pitting peaches. This was hard work for everyone, but especially for my mother, who had a rheumatic heart. Her heart was so weak that as she stood pitting peaches, her blood would pool in her legs, and they would ache painfully throughout her 8-hour shift. My father didn't want her to work, but she insisted, because that was the only way she could buy school clothes for my brothers, Gerald and Norman, for my sister Marilyn, and for me. Hunt's Cannery was just 5 blocks from our house. My mother always told my father that she would walk home. She wanted him to get a sleep because he worked 2 jobs. During the day, he worked as a gardener. But every evening and every weekend, he worked to put back our family's nursery, which had been vandalized and trashed during the war. At the end of every day, he was always tired, weary. But he would always set his alarm for midnight and pick up my mother when her swing shift was over. Why did my mom and dad work so hard? Like all of our parents, they guided their lives with the Japanese precept, kodomo no tameni, for the sake of their children. I believe that it is our moral responsibility to follow their moral example. Let us all work together to make the world a better place for the sake of the Onsei, the Gosei, and all the generations to come. And we can draw inspiration from the Holy Quran. The Quran says we must respond to hatred with beauty. And that is exactly what we have been doing. The Wakasa Monument has inspired us to make films, create art, write books, convene conversations, and to build community. After Mr. Wakasa was murdered, people reported seeing a ball of fire in the night sky. In Japanese folklore, this ball of fire is called a hinotama and represents Mr. Wakasa's departing soul. Here's how poet Brandon Shimoda described it. The ball of light that bounced above the concentration camp held in its patience the memory of the unusual flower the Japanese man was reaching for when he was shot. Like everyone who has been inspired by Mr. Wakasa's life, Brandon's words are said not with bitterness and resentment, but with tenderness, with grace. Tonight, we invite the Topaz Museum Board and everyone else who wishes to join your voices with ours. Let's work together to make sure that Mr. Wakasa's monument is treated with the respect that it has earned and with the tenderness and grace it deserves. Let us all fight so that Mr. Wakasa's monument can stand as a testament on behalf of everyone who cares about social justice and human dignity. Thank you.
While the next slide is getting ready, I just want to make a note that the film that you saw earlier was by Emiko Amori, and it was a short history of the Wakasa Monument and site. And now we go on to the letter. The letter was published to the Topaz Museum Board in the hopes of charting a path forward. Thanks to the immense support from community members and allies, we can report that we are now at a total of 1,209 signatories. Please allow me to introduce Jim Russell, who will now report on the statistical data from the letter.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. These are some compiled numbers on people who signed the letter. There's, in many cases, people who had ancestors or were survivors from multiple camps. So this isn't something where you add up the numbers. It's more that just people had associations with these different camps in different ways. So, for example, it's quite common. We have a high number here for Tule Lake because people were transferred in and out of Tule Lake into other camps. And so those people are counted in some cases twice or three times in the numbers. But here are WRA camps, and then in addition, we have DOJ military camps such as Crystal City and Santa Fe, where people also had either ancestors or were survivors from those places in total. And this is not a duplication, this is the actual number. There were 41 survivors of the various camps, such as Patrick, who signed the letter, including in other people's cases, an association with the Hawaiian camps. There were two people who were in Crystal City who were brought there from Peru, who are still survivors. There were 9 people who had ancestors in various Canadian camps. And if we take all of this together, all of these people had some sort of Japanese American or Japanese Canadian, or in some case, Japanese Latin American background. But then besides that, we also added up how many people had academic backgrounds of different kinds. This is not, in any of these cases, an absolute number. It's more of an estimate, because some people who signed didn't necessarily identify themselves in any of these categories, or if they did, they didn't necessarily make it clear in a way where we could tabulate it. There were, in addition to that, a number of organizations, including a number of different JACL groups, and we made it the list possible to be signed by anonymous members. And then the geographic distribution of people who we could identify really included all sorts of places: US, Canada, Australia, Japan, Ireland, France, at least 29 states that we again could identify. And there are multi-generations where people would say that they were particularly Yonsei or Gosei descendants. So that's just a very brief wrap up on the numbers who've so far signed, as of the end of October, the open letter.
Thank you, Jim. Backed by your support of the letter, the Wakasa Memorial Committee has written to the Topaz Museum Board to ask for an in-person meeting. There are 5 issues that we addressed to the Topaz Museum Board. They are community archaeology, transparency, including releasing the historic video evidence of the excavation, professional standards, inclusive decision-making, and a formal partnership framework. If you would like to enter questions into the chat, that would be great. We'll have a dedicated question and answer time, but if you guys are starting to think of them now, that would be wonderful. In the meantime, we are also going to do, I have a few questions for two of our panelists, not myself. So I will start with Miguel, if that's okay with you, Miguel.
That is completely and totally okay.
All right. Can you please explain how the process for this type of archaeological find should be? What is the proper process for this?
Well, with any archaeological site, and it's a combination of methodologies that I was trained in, and also being that there's so many methodologies that you can approach depending on what site you're working in, where you are, the time you have, the resources you have, that can change. And some of it is also my personal kind of view on what I would do in this instance. The basic philosophy that I work with is how much information can we extract from a site with the least amount of physical interference with the site. You know, when archaeology first started as a discipline, and the image that most of us have in our heads is shovel, you know, screens, trowels, go in there, make a big trench, dig, draw, find the artifacts, display them in museums, etc. Like that is the sort of like the, you know, popular image of my field, of my discipline. But throughout, as we know, you know, as time passed, we've adopted new technologies and new methods to extract the same amount of information, and sometimes even more information than we can get by digging. With the Wakasa stone in particular, I don't think that removing the stone would have ever been an option uh, to to know and to understand the site better. The only time removal of a stone would have been necessary, and see, I just can't really think of any information unless we know that it's going to be damaged, or something's going to happen to it, or there is some crucial piece of information that we can only get by removing the stone, which neither of those possibilities, they're practically non-existent. The first thing I would have done is speak to the local communities. There are still survivors and there are still descendants. The survivors and descendants, often the best, and I say it in quotes, artifact that we have is a human element. The reason we do our work behind every artifact, behind every display, behind every museum, every collection, is a pair of human hands. And ultimately, the story is what we are after, not the artifact, not the thing itself. It is a human story behind what we are looking at. Archaeology, by definition, we have to depend on artifacts only because humans are usually not here anymore. In cases like this, as an archaeologist myself, it is an extremely fortunate situation because humans are still here. There are people alive that we can talk to, and they have so much to say. They can give us way more information than we can glean from removing a stone that was put there as a memorial. And it's also almost taboo in archaeology. If we know that there's a burial and we know that it has significance and descendants, survivors are still alive and know about that burial as well, the last thing we want to do is remove it. There is no scientific and there is no scientific or academic goal that outweighs the respect that monument is due. There is no question that is important enough to warrant removal of that stone, which is why I said earlier, I really just can't think of any reason why removal of the stone would have been necessary. It was in a dry environment, protected from the elements underground, was going to be there. Locating it, going to the National Archives, finding the map and locating it was in itself a success story. And I would have spoken first to the communities, for the local communities, the people who are luckily, we still have them with us and they have so much to say. If we have the resource, we will use it as archaeologists. And if the human resource is there, we're going to use our human resource. It is their voice that ultimately is what matters most. Physically to the site, probably the least invasive method I can think of is metal detecting. Without putting a shovel to the ground or without removing any of the soil, we can run. Right now, I am working on an archaeological site here in Texas near Houston, the San Jacinto battleground. It was the site of the San Jacinto battle of the Texas Revolutionary War. Sam Houston, the whole story, and they're going to expand the monument. They're going to build a new visitor center, but they're going to build in an area of the battlefield that hasn't necessarily been excavated or been explored. So what we're doing is we're metal detecting. We're not just going to dig anywhere we want. We are going to metal detect, get locations of things that may be anomalies in the ground, and then methodically select which areas we're going to excavate. But that there's a lot you can do before you even start to dig, especially like for this site that I'm working on. There's the archives. We can go to the state archives. We can get a lot of information, archival information, before we even begin to, mess with the site. So local communities, speak to people. The least invasive methods possible, metal detecting. There's also ground penetrating radar that detects anomalies or inconsistencies in the soils. It kind of looks like a lawnmower. You push it around on transects, and if there's any inconsistencies in the soils, like maybe there's a shaft, somebody may be buried there. There's another project that I was involved with that may happen regarding unmarked graves in Seguin, Texas, where Texas Rangers would leave the bodies of people who they killed, and most of them were indigenous people, Black people, and Mexican Americans. And the best way we may be able to locate their presence is through ground penetrating radar. We don't have to dig anything. We just literally push this machine across the landscape and detect inconsistencies in the soils. Whereas a trained eye can see, oh, here is what may be a grave shaft. We might do aerial imagery. We have a massive collection of historic maps, historic topographic maps. They can tell us, we have just everything that we need to tell us where the buildings were, where people would congregate, what was here, what was there. So the archives would be probably the next thing that I would look at. And then after we get all that information, we put it together, we synthesize it, we sit down, we talk to the stakeholders, to everybody involved. Then and only then will we sit down and start to even consider excavating. But that is after we take everything into consideration, and then we're all in agreement of an area that, this is where we might want to dig. And I know that there was a suggestion with community archaeology, which I think is amazing, is great. Community archaeology is always, I will always be a proponent of that. And there's so many examples that the Houston Archaeological Society does it regularly. They get members of the community, and they literally teach people from the community, what we're looking for, what are the differences between each artifact when you're sifting dirt, how to sift it properly, and it just raises the awareness for people who might see an artifact or a historic site, and then they'll know what to do or who to call or how to treat it. But to go immediately into site destruction and extraction for its own sake strips whatever it is you're doing, whatever artifact, whatever site you're working at, of its story, of its context. Luckily, we know the story of the stone. But generally speaking, with archaeology, once you remove something from its provenience, we can no longer associate it with the things around it. That's often how we date sites, how we date artifacts, not necessarily by what they are, it's by their association with their environment and the things they are found next to. That is how we get the most accurate information, and that is how we start building a story of the artifact, of the site. Going straight into extraction of something from the ground, disturbing the soil around it, I don't know, but was the soil that was removed to get the stone out of the ground, that soil, was it screened? Was it analyzed for cultural material? That would have also been important. There are things that are very small that still can hold a lot of meaning, that can still tell us a lot about what happened in an area. So it's that in a nutshell. Well, not so much in a nutshell. I know I've dragged on a little bit, but the first thing I would do is speak to people, communities, the human resource. If it is there, I will use it. Second thing, what is the least invasive way that I can get information from this site? Metal detecting, ground penetrating radar, thinking of things like that. And then after that, archival research, or perhaps archival research can come first, and then we can go out to the field with the metal detector, with the GPR. But those two definitely, archival research is very important. We have a ton of resources, a ton of literature to refer to with this site, and then talk to everybody involved, include everybody in the process, and then and only then, after looking at everything that we have, we can all agree and we can all talk and we can say, you know what, after everything we've done, I think this area here, we can probably put a 2x2 meter unit and get to work. But it's a process. We don't immediately go into the field as archaeologists with a shovel in hand and start digging. Even with my work is mostly contract archaeology. Is what archaeologists in the field call almost like fast archaeology. And by fast, I mean I have to do 2 to 3 months of background research and coordination with stakeholders and oftentimes First Nations peoples before we even go out into the field. By the time we get to the field, we have been planning for this project, doing background research and coordinating with stakeholders for months. And then we go into the field. But yeah, that's pretty much what I would do, the things I would think about. And yeah.
So, as far as community archaeology, I live in Colorado, so we have a multi here, and they have done community archaeology there before, where the high school students are actually very, very involved in the care of the site. Patrick, I wonder, what are your thoughts as far as community archaeology go? Like, do you feel that this is something that would also be healing for our community as well as survivors and descendants?
I have to say that Miguel's comments increased my understanding of how archaeology is done by about 1,000%. And as I listened to you speak, Miguel, the word that kept coming up was respect. That archaeology and archaeologists have a responsibility to do their work with a respect for the people whose artifacts they're investigating. And you've given me a lot to think about. You know, I think a lot of my understanding of archaeology comes from Harrison Ford. And,
Same.
I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I have dressed up as Indiana Jones for a Halloween or two, but no, that's completely understandable. For a lot of us, I mean, in school, when I was in school, and even afterwards, a lot of our formative years were because we found Indiana Jones running around with a whip and punching Nazis. So that was the process for a lot of us. Yeah.
I'm also curious, Miguel, can you kind of talk to us a little bit about how the video of how the stone was extracted, can you tell us what that could tell archaeologists today, even though it's already been extracted from the earth?
Yeah. So
Sorry, I'm going to make you talk a lot.
it's okay. It's okay. So the first thing that we try to determine when we're trying to make a plan for an excavation, a survey, is often what areas within this area of interest that we're looking at have been disturbed. often, especially with my job, with my career, we only have a limited budget and a limited timeline. And so that being the case, we have to be very selective and we have to judge our options very carefully, because we're not gonna, if we have time to dig only one area and there's two to pick from, one of them has been disturbed and dug up and completely just, you know, obliterated by a machine, and the other hasn't been touched yet. It's still pretty much intact. There's still native vegetation on it. Nothing has been built on it for 100 years. We're gonna look at the intact area. So knowing exactly what was done in terms of where the machine went, how much dirt it moved, which areas were disturbed, that can tell us where to focus our energies, where to focus our efforts in terms of an excavation or just a survey. When I go and do a project in the field, and let's say we have to dig a small test pit every 100 meters, and we have 16 test pits to dig. 4 of those test pits are next to a highway. They're right on the side of the highway. That slope, you know how highways are usually raised up a little above the normal ground. That slope there, that is dirt that may not even be originally from there. That's dirt that's been disturbed. And yet we have 4 tests that are supposed to go in there. We will maybe dig them at 100-meter intervals, knowing that this is entirely disturbed. We're not going to get deep enough to find anything, but we're going to do it because it's our due diligence. We're still going to do it. We're still going to look and see what we find. But then we get to an area that's next to an existing archaeological site, a body of water, and a high point in the landscape. Our plan calls for 2 tests in that area. Well, we might shorten those intervals from 100 meters to 30, making it maybe 6 tests instead of 2, because that is a high probability area. So knowing what was done here at this site in terms of the disturbance, you know, exactly how much was mixed around, that can help us determine which are high probability areas and which are low probability areas. So yes, it would be very important to know exactly what was done when that stone was removed, for us to kind of determine that. So yeah, that's more or less the methodology that I would operate under. But we need to know what areas were disturbed and what areas are intact. And obviously, I would look at historic maps. I would look at topographic maps from the U.S. Geological Service, and look at what has been done at that site over time. For example, the road that's there now. But we also have to take into account more recent disturbances, and a machine going in there removing a stone from the ground is a major disturbance. And as an archaeologist, you know, we would like to know where it went. Maybe it moved some more dirt on its way to move the stone. Maybe it moved some things around. You know, we don't know, because we don't have access to the footage. We don't have access to any plans that may have been drafted to remove the stone. None of that. So knowing exactly what happened is definitely, it would be useful for us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Patrick, I have a question for you. As a survivor of Topaz, how did you feel when you heard about the way that the stone was extracted from the ground?
A strange mixture of sorrow and rage. And I think sorrow and rage are feelings that every camp survivor experiences. And partly because of our culture, and partly because we never heard about the incarceration in school. We never learned the vocabulary. We never developed the skills necessary to talk about these deep feelings and deep historical events. And I think that one beneficial aspect of all of these events is that we're now talking to each other in deep ways. We're now making new friendships, learning new things, and there's been an outpouring of creative activity among our allies and within our community. And when I think about on whose behalf we're working, I always come up with that we're working for future generations. So all this conversation and exploration, I think will benefit our future generations.
I have to agree with that sentiment. And the fact that you said sorrow and rage, it really echoed with me as a descendant myself. My family, my father especially, he never talked about camp. I knew he was there, and when I asked him about it once, he kind of pushed me off to the side and said, I don't really want to talk about it. I was there, yeah. But I could tell that he did not want to talk about it. So when Nancy had told me myself about how the stone had been extracted, I felt like a part of my heart had been extracted as well. It was very hard for me to hear. So I definitely can, and I felt anger too, anger at knowing that I felt like I was pissed off. Honestly, I was really pissed off about it because I felt like it was a slap in the face to my family. And my great grandfather died in Topaz, and it just felt like a total slap in the face to my family without having a ceremony there, or other Japanese Americans are finding out what should have happened. So I definitely echo that sentiment. So I was going to transition into the Q&A from the audience. If anybody has any questions, please enter it in the chat. Let's see here. I do see Biff has a question. 3. If this happened to this monument, how is everything else being collected from the site? How is it being documented and by whom? How do we know this isn't still happening? We don't.
Yeah, that's the thing. We don't. Ultimately, from my understanding, the museum board owns this property, the site, and any looting that may be happening, any trespassing, at night when nobody's looking. I don't know if they have a security system set up. I don't know if they have maybe like, a sign that says no trespassing, museum property. But without the proper guardrails in place, we just don't know how much the site has been disturbed. We don't know who may be going out there night after night, just kind of getting what they want. Often that is why, as archaeologists, we tend to be very wary of kind of like divulging exactly where we have sites and artifacts. And that is the dichotomy between my philosophy as an archaeologist is this is a science and discipline that belongs to the people. This is our shared cultural heritage. I will not hesitate to tell you everything that I can, everything that I know, and then I will be eager to hear your thoughts and your ideas. And it's an exchange to better understand our human past. It is not from me to you. It is not like I don't deign to tell somebody, share my expertise. When I go into an exchange, it is exactly that, an exchange, because I know that the person I'm speaking to has also something to offer. They are, after all, humans just like me, with their own perspectives, their own histories, and their own interpretations of history. Um, so it becomes kind of like uh, a conundrum when somebody wants to know exactly where something is. What are your intentions? You know, it becomes kind of especially in a site where this is a space that is not necessarily my purview. There are still survivors and descendants. How it is not on me to tell somebody where something is, knowing that there are people who this matters a lot to. And that is more than anything else the most important thing. I don't I'm I have I won't compromise the integrity, potentially compromise the integrity of a site, um if the people who are most invested in it, in this case descendants and survivors, don't have a say. If the Wakasa stone had never been removed and somebody goes up and says, uh that Nancy finds the map. We know exactly where it is, but it's not been removed yet, and somebody wants to know exactly where the stone is. I would be hesitant to tell you where it is. I would tell you everything I know about it and what happened, and the amazing story, because ultimately that is the real thing that matters, the story, the history. The stone is very symbolic. It's part of that story. But I would be how would the descendant and surviving communities feel if I just divulged the location of a stone that is very important to them, knowing that the people who are asking about the location don't probably have their best interest in mind? So it becomes kind of like a lot of people in the past, not only to me but just to archaeology in general, have accused us of being very secretive, and what exactly is that you have found? You're not telling us all your secrets. And then people have popularized it in shows like Ancient Aliens. Oh, archaeologists, they don't tell you what they're doing. Like, we will tell you everything. um but it becomes difficult with exact locations, because it's one of those things where we have to take into account protecting the site, and we have to help as a whole understand that it's not the artifact of the site, it's a story. And the story we'll extract, we will share with everybody, anytime, anywhere, 100%. Everything we know about this site, I will share with you. Here are all these books, all these papers, my own opinions, my own interpretation. It's all yours.
Thank you.
But yeah.
I also see that Chris Hirano has asked a question. If a descendant of Mr. Wakasa or of the individuals who buried the stone wanted to remove and claim the stone for their own, would an archaeologist endorse or allow it? Interesting question.
It's I would treat it in the same way as we treat repatriation with indigenous remains. Talking about the NAPRA laws like that. If descendant communities want something done with a site, then they have the final say. If a descendant of Mr. Wakasa wanted the stone removed and claimed the stone for their own, as my philosophy as an archaeologist is, yes, it's yours. This is your story. This is your purview. You know, that would be my approach. We do it a lot with descendant communities of enslaved people, like the Clotilda. Um, or indigenous people. I have done work with a lot of indigenous specialists in the Dakotas. And my archaeology expertise doesn't extend to the Dakotas. It was my first time there. So I would always defer to the indigenous specialists who have been there for several years. You know, how do we approach this site? What do we do here? What should we collect? Should we dig? Should we not dig? Um, but um, but yeah, if there are descendants, my first reaction would be, yeah, no, it's yours. If you want to do this, you can do this. I am not a gatekeeper. I am not, you know, I am not guarding these artifacts, these sites. That's not what I'm there for. So yeah.
I'm wondering also, let's see, I'm getting a question from my text. So, as far as community history goes, being that I don't think Mr. Wakasa had any descendants that we know of, being that that is the case, I feel like the community history would kind of take precedence over that. Is that correct? Where the stone should have had some sort of community input.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be like burial goods.
Oh, if it's Kayla has a few words to say. This is
Hi,
my
Kayla.
beautiful wife, Kayla. I know you guys met during the trip. And she has some thoughts if that's
I'm not an archaeologist, but I am an anthropologist and also just generally very opinionated. Masako, I saw said something in the chat about releasing the video. I think the video should be released not just to archaeologists and researchers, but to descendants, because it's your property. It's your history that was dug up. And then things that are important to me, just from being, Miguel's partner and listening to him talk about archaeology, is that things like what kind of material was used to actually bury the stone? Did they bring dirt from elsewhere, or was it the dirt that was already there? What did they use to dig the hole? Right? Was it done by human hands, or what kind of tools were used? Was part of the ingenious resistance of the stone's burial how they actually dug the hole? Things like that we might have been able to know from a site that was undisturbed. By doing a methodical archaeological dig, we no longer have the opportunity to do. But we might be able to glean some insights about that kind of thing from the video. Information like that about how the site was actually created, which would probably just serve to verify what the archival record shows. And then the other thing that I've been thinking is, as far as like who the stone belongs to, I don't think there's any question about that among anthropologists anymore. One of the dark histories of anthropology and archaeology is that so much of the foundation of the field was built on the looting of goods from sacred sites of indigenous peoples, and also kind of just helping to create unfounded theories about racism and differences between ethnic groups. But overarchingly now we understand as a field that those goods have to be repatriated, and there is a standard for that, and there's federal law about repatriating burial goods, and I think that that's literally what this is. It should be treated the same way. It doesn't. It belongs to the people who put it there.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Kayla. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
One of the questions that I've seen in the chat is, how do we move on? And Patrick, I'm actually really interested to hear your thoughts on this. How do you think we move on and build a future?
I'm not sure. One of the things that's happened in the last few months because of this discussion is I have gotten to know my mother and father much more deeply. And when I see ICE agents terrorize people, I think this is terrible, inhumane. And then I realized that that's exactly what happened to my family in our community. And so I'm trying to understand how they felt. I think about my father. He was married to my mother, who was not well, and he had 3 children, my 2 older brothers and me. And he was also caring for his grandparents. And because of patterns of immigration, there's actually almost a missing generation between the Issei and the Nisei. The Issei came to make their fortunes and they planned to return home. But of course, most stayed. And then, so they sent away for picture brides. And when they married, they were usually in their mid-30s, not their early 20s. And so there's this entire generation missing, almost an entire generation. And that exacerbated the normal communication problems between generations. And that was made even more intense because of preferred language. The Issei preferred Japanese, the Nisei preferred English generally. And then in the camps, at least initially, no notices could be put up within the community in Japanese. They all had to be in English. And leadership positions were assumed by the Nisei. And so it inverted, kind of screwed up the generational process. So all of these things are coming out for me when we discuss Mr. Wakasa and his story and his monument. And I think that the landscape gardeners who created that monument, 2,000-pound monument, and erected were incredibly brave. I mean, they were not only acting in defiance of camp authorities, they were opposed by Nisei leadership, who often colluded with the camp authorities and informed on people. And so all of these things are coming out. Now, I welcome this information, and I hope that we can have these discussions. I know Masako's foundation has been very generous in offering its support, and I hope that we take advantage of that generosity and organize further discussions, and begin to see similarities in experience of other communities, Black community, indigenous communities, and to make common cause and to learn each other's stories and speak to each other. I think that would be wonderful.
I agree with that completely. Before I move on to the comments video, I just want to thank both of you. It is my honor to speak with you and have a conversation with you. Thank you so much.
No, thank you.
Go
sorry.
ahead.
Thank you guys for allowing me to share in this struggle with you and allow me to be in this space with you. It is my honor to be here, and I've learned a lot, and that's been the best part. It's made friends, and I've learned a lot, and I'm continuing to learn. So thank you guys so much for that.
Oh, I'm sorry. There is one more question I did not see. Is the disposition of the memorial stone, release of excavation videos, etc., controlled by the Topaz Museum Board? If so, is there a process for changing the members of the board, and could that happen on a reasonable time frame?
That is a very interesting question. Changing the members of the board. I am not, honestly, I am not familiar with the process of the machinations of the Topaz Museum Board specifically, and what would have to happen for leadership to change or anything of that effect. What I do know, what has always been my opinion from the beginning, is that I think the museum board needs to understand that if they work with the community, if they work with survivors and descendants, they can only win. It is to their benefit to work with the survivors and the descendants regarding the stone, the site, how to care for it, what can be done, preservation. The Houston Museum of Natural Science, they revamped their entire displays and their section of the Hall of the First Americans. And they did it by centering indigenous voices. Every panel you see, every artifact you see has been described by an indigenous representative. What went up on display and what came down, what was put, the text in those panels was done with indigenous representatives present. If Topaz does something similar with the stone, with the site, while we have such a precious resource, the human resource, we still have survivors with us and we have descendants with us. Literally, a museum can ask for nothing better. They can ask for no better opportunity. This is a golden opportunity for the museum. If they do that, all they can do is just, they have nothing to lose and everything to gain if they do that. I know, as an avid museum goer myself, if I go to a museum and I see a panel that says, this was created, this museum display, or this was created with the help of survivors of the incarceration camp, of descendants of the incarceration camp. Everything you see here was we worked together, we coordinated. If I see something like that, it'll only make me want to go again and again and again. And I would tell everybody I know that you got to check this museum out, because this is legit. This is cool. Any self-respecting historian, archaeologist, or just history buff, whatever, what have you, any museum goer, that is to me, the most attractive thing about museums is when they put themselves aside to work with the community, when they decenter themselves and center the community, and together they collaborate and create something like what happened with the museum here in Houston. You know, I don't know, I can't think of a better opportunity for the Topaz Museum Board. I don't know the politics of the intricacies of the board, what can be done. Maybe we can change leadership. I'm not that familiar, but what I do know is that the board can only benefit from working with the Wakasa Memorial Committee and creating a museum exhibit that truly honors the stories, the human story, and the human suffering of this site.
Thank
Yeah.
You know,
oh, sorry, go ahead, Patrick. I'm so sorry.
Jane Beckwith and I used to be close friends, and we used to teach a summer extension course for Topaz teachers who were interested in, for Utah teachers who were interested in the story of Topaz. And I found our collaboration to be very enriching for me. And it allowed me to hear people talk who were genuinely curious about the story. And that made me think about different things. In each workshop, there were usually 30 people in each workshop. And Jane told me that at least 29 of the 30 were Mormon, and which shouldn't surprise anyone. And I hate to stereotype, but I understand that Mormons are deeply interested in local history. And so they brought a curiosity, and they would ask me how I felt about things and how my parents experienced things. And those questions made me go deeper. And I imagined, for example, about my father with these huge responsibilities on his shoulders. And standing outside looking at the mountain and the snow. And what came to mind was a poem by Sylvia Plath. And I don't remember the entire poem, but she's imagining her father. She's looking at a mountain saying, people and stars regard me sadly, and I disappoint them. A flower left out, a stillness in my heart. And I thought, this isn't how my father would have expressed it. But I think that's what he felt, that he disappointed people. If he felt left out. Now, had it not been for my work with Jane and the question from Mormon teachers, none of this would have come into my mind and into my heart. So, and I was thinking about the feelings you had, Lauren, of seeing the photograph and how deeply it affected you in complex ways. And I agree with what you're saying, Miguel, is that interaction and conversation can only help everyone. And I think that's our responsibility to encourage that.
Thank you. I've run a little bit long because I like to talk to people. So next, I want to introduce a video made by Emiko Amori. There were a lot of comments that were made when the letter was being signed. So Emiko made this really amazing and beautiful film where some of the comments are being read aloud. And we'd like to share that with you now. Thank you.
My name is Toda Saito. We were assigned to Block 36 upon our arrival to Topaz in September of 1942. Our address was Barrack 6, Block 36, Unit C and D. James Wakasa was our neighbor in Barrack 7. I remember him because he had a dog and he was a nice man. We ate at the same mess hall and we used the same latrine. And I remember the evening he was murdered. It was April 11th, 1943. The trauma of that experience has lasted my entire life to my age 88 today.
My uncle, 8 years old at the time, may have been one of the last people to see Mr. Wakasa walking his dog that tragic day. My uncle and his friends often saw Mr. Wakasa walking his dog, but on this day, minutes after walking by Mr. Wakasa, my uncle did not see, but became frightened at the sound of a gunshot and ran back to the family barrack. My grandmother took my uncle to the funeral memorial service held on April 19th, 1943. My young uncle was deeply traumatized by the murder of Mr. Wakasa and had nightmares for many nights afterward. Yuri Miyagawa.
Could anything be more important than preserving the history of those deemed disposable?
Physical remains tell a story. Learning that story can initiate caring.
My name is Ronald Keno, and I was an internee at Topaz internment camp. I am the only living witness to the killing of James Wakasa. This despicable act of violence and racism should never be eliminated from history.
The James Wakasa story and Memorial Stone remains one of the most powerful chapters of Japanese-American wartime protest and mourning. Its preservation and place in public history deserves the highest respect from a team that combines Topaz Museum personnel, Japanese-American camp descendants, archaeologists, and educators dedicated to Japanese-American wartime historic preservation.
What happened to James Wakasa is a hugely important part of the incarceration story that absolutely must be preserved.
This is beyond covering up history. This is erasing forever our history.
I believe museums should respect the wishes of the local communities on which they depend and serve.
The Wakasa Memorial Stone doesn't just represent Mr. Wakasa. It represents the entire Japanese American community that fought and continues to fight the unjust treatment of anyone considered an other. It is vitally important that this piece of history is not buried again.
What happened was atrocious. A memorial is a reminder to learn from our mistakes and to remember the unjust suffering that was inflicted upon others. We must not and cannot stand idly by while this happens again.
Let's atone for our mistakes, not hide them, and allow our fellows and descendants to benefit from such knowledge.
The story of America's concentration camps and the imprisonment of Americans of Japanese descent has become little more than a footnote in history. Future generations need to understand that racism and fascism are part of the nation's history.
This is our legacy. When one of our voices is silenced, it impacts all of our stories. We must never forget and never repeat this horrific part of American history.
When I imagine the Topaz community laying a stone for James Wakasa, I imagine their rage, their grief, their commitment to never forget what had been done, their promise to shield and guard the memory. I imagine them burying the stone with protective love. I imagine them setting the stone knowing that the descendants of Topaz would return to find it, that it would speak to them for the unspeakable, for the things beyond words. The stone and the history and memory that it carries should have been left to the stewardship of the descendants of Topaz. They have been robbed of the opportunity to receive whatever message was buried with it, to hear and speak and to act accordingly for the healing of the community. The stone was not a mere object, it was a sacred cry to remember and a precious heirloom of agency and resistance. While the forced removal cannot be undone, what happens next will mean so much for the descendants of Topaz. I wish for them to have the chance to restore dignity to the stone and to process together the grief of Wakasa's murder towards their healing. Star Sumie Miyata.
This concludes our program. The afterlife of the letter continues. If you'd like to sign the letter, there's a link in our website, which is in the QR code and also listed. If I have not gotten to your questions, I so apologize for that. We ran out of time. I will try to get those questions answered, though, through email if I can. And thank you all so much for attending.